Thank you for listening to PoliticalStorm.com. I'm John Small. We've got a special guest joining us right now, Andy Gause. He's a currency expert, and he's a real fun guy to visit with. We've talked to him several times on here. First, let's say hello to Andy Gause. How are you, sir?
Oh, hello there, John. Doing great.
Well, we're glad to have you on the program, and we're going to chat today a little bit about, is it possible to make America great again? So, first of all, that's a pretty poignant question. Is that possible?
Indeed, it's possible. Yeah, we just need to dust off the Constitution and go back to the way our founders structured this company. That's what it is. It's a company. You know, we're a business. We can't spend more than we take in and reduce our means of production. It just can't be done.
So for the longest time now, we've been spending money like we can just keep printing it because, I guess we kind of can, but that's not good, is it?
It is not good, yeah. And, you know, the central bank used to belong to we the people. The first bank of the United States, America, was a shareholder. And there were private investors that were also shareholders. But a portion of the profits from that operation flowed into the Treasury, and Treasury pretty much could use the central bank for its own benefit. Lately, since 1913, we've turned over the power to create money to a group of private banks who, coincidentally, are also the number one contributors to both sides of the presidential campaign. And, you know, you have to wonder who their real constituencies are. Our elected leaders seem to take the bulk of their money from the corporations that own and control America's banking system. So a little bit of an incestuous relationship there, if you ask me.
Kind of sounds like it. Now, if that were happening in a private corporation, if that were happening in your company, or if that were happening in my company, they would claim that that's wrong, and there would probably be some sort of investigation into what we're doing, and we could probably get in trouble for that. But for the government to do it, we can get away with it.
It seems to be that way. And, you know, it's so anti-Constitution. Article 1 says that no state shall make anything but gold and silver coin a payment and tender and payment of debt. And Article 1 says that Congress shall have the power to coin money and regulate the value thereof. Both of those powers have been abrogated. The first one, gold and silver coin, wouldn't that be something? At least we'd have a sound dollar again, as we did before 1964. But in terms of Congress having the power to coin money, Congress can only issue bonds. So Congress spends $1,000 that it doesn't have. I owe you $1,000. They make a bond, and it yields interest. They then hand that bond over to the Federal Reserve banks, primarily the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, who creates $1,000 and loans it to Congress at interest. What the heck? Why doesn't Congress just print its own money? I don't understand the concept, except that $250 billion annual interest payment. Well, of course, that does speak volumes.
Yeah, definitely. Now, let's talk about a time back when America was great. If you know, we've got a candidate saying, let's make America great again, and I still think we've got a great country, but I understand that there are some issues. When in this country's history would you say was the greatest period for America?
Well, I think everyone, historians and all, would agree for the 1950s and 60s were a boom time in the United States. And strict protective tariffs prevented our companies from packing up and moving overseas. Then, of course, we put in a series of environmental and worker safety regulations. So these regulations naturally raised the cost of the products that these companies manufactured. And then the free trade mantra came along. They said, hey, we can not only escape all these regulations, we can escape the unions, we can move our operations to India or China or to some foreign country, make the goods there without any regard to the environment or worker safety or union rules. And we could then import the goods back into the United States with no tariff, no tax. So this whole free trade movement got started, and the concept, the utopian society where we would let you sell your goods in our marketplace and you would let us sell our goods in your marketplace, absurd. Yeah. And we keep living up to our side of the bargain while they don't. So I have a friend of mine who's in South America, Argentina to be precise. He took his Dodge Durango down there. It blew a motor. So no problem. Tennessee, they rebuild engines there, $2,200. I could shoot it down to you. Free trade, right? Wrong. 100% tariffs. 100%. So we need to do the same thing. If you're going to sell your goods in our country, well, you need to pay a tariff. This idea that we surrender our trade negotiating powers to a World Trade Organization and they tell us what we allow in and what we don't allow in, it's absolutely ridiculous. And it certainly is utopian and doesn't work. So it's time for America not only to be great again, but to be selfish again. Start thinking about ourselves. I think we haven't done that for 40 years.
And I think maybe even just being smart again. The U.S. has an annual trade deficit of about $500 billion. That's a pretty big number. Now, first of all, let's talk about what a trade deficit is so people understand what that is and why that number is so alarming.
Well, I sell you my goods, you sell me your goods. So we import $2 trillion worth of goods. But we only export $1.5 trillion worth of goods, so we're out of balance. And that extra money comes back into the United States and buys not only our property, but our great companies. You know, it's ironic that an American business person who wants to go to China and buy something Chinese can only buy 49% of it. They're not allowed to own the whole thing. But yet the Chinese come to the United States and buy up our largest pork producer, or our most valued intellectual property. That is when they're not stealing it. You know, how many times has an American come up with a great product, patented it, sent it to China for manufacturing, because there are no U.S. manufacturers left, and then only to find that the marketplace swamped with duplicate goods. Someone has stole their intellectual property and is now selling it, undercutting their price. So the intellectual property theft, currency manipulation, and unfair trade practices in terms of allowing our goods into their marketplace, this is what happens around the world. And as a result, we have a huge trade imbalance. And the real irony there is the only way that we're able to export $1.5 trillion worth of goods is if we finance. We have our own export-import bank where, you know, if Boeing wants to sell aircraft, they have to finance the deal, otherwise they won't sell any at all. So I think the trade practices engaged in by this country by themselves is an area that Mr. Trump could really square the playing field. And if he does, and we start seeing more revenue come into the Treasury, that'll eliminate the the budget deficit, and then we can start working on the national debt.
Again, visiting right now with Andy Gause, one of America's foremost experts on the history of U.S. currency, also the author of The Secret World of Money and Uncle Sam Cooks the Books. We'll chat about those again in a minute, but right now you were just talking about Donald Trump. Now, one of the things that he's been talking about is renegotiating some of the bad deals that our country has gotten into. What would the effect be on our economy if he were able to renegotiate some of these deals?
Oh, a booming economy, because, I mean, this is the problem. And you notice that those that have given us this globalist tradition of free trade, who benefit the most from it, by the way, are the ones screaming and kicking. No, you can't renegotiate this trade deal. No, but why? Well, because it's the worst doggone deal you ever want to see. When we allow our trade negotiators to also be employees of the corporations that they're negotiating jobs for, and you have to wonder. For example, the Korean trade deal. So here's the way that deal went. If we allow our banks to go into Korea and underwrite their corporate bonds and take deposits and essentially set up branches in Korea, then they can sell unlimited amounts of automobiles into the United States. So for the Koreans, that was a great deal. I mean, they picked up 50,000 manufacturing jobs, car manufacturing jobs. What did we get? Maybe 50 banking jobs. Maybe we did. But what did the banks get? And this is the real incestuous relationship. When the Central Bank of the United States, the Federal Reserve banks, are owned by Wells Fargo, Citigroup, J.P. Morgan, and they negotiate a trade deal that allows their banks to expand everywhere in the world at the expense of our middle-class manufacturing base, well, yeah, we got a bunch more rich bankers, but we've got a lot less middle-class family workers that are, underemployed, shall we say. They're not being paid enough for the jobs that they're forced to take. So we need to look back at what made America the strongest superpower in the universe and harken back to those days. The idea of weakening America and taking bits of our manufacturing and sort of giving them away so to benefit other countries, I'm not for that. I'm all for raising their standard of living, but not at the expense of everyday Americans, and that's where I think the disconnect has been in the last 40 years.
Again, visiting with Andy Gause, and he's the author of a couple of books, The Secret World of Money and Uncle Sam Cooks the Books. Where can we find copies of these, Andy?
Oh, goodness, anywhere. Your favorite local bookseller, I would recommend, but if you have to go to one of the beasts, you know who they are. They'll certainly find either of those titles for you. I wrote The Secret World of Money in 1996 because back then people used to argue with me that, oh, no, you're wrong, Andy. The Federal Reserve, why, that's part of the government. No, it isn't. This is the real dirty secret in The Secret World of Money. And then, of course, Uncle Sam Cooks the Books. That was in 2003. And in that book, I pointed out all these quasi-government operations like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and how if they were allowed to continue unchecked, that they would put a burden on us that we couldn't bear. And, of course, that is exactly what happened. I'm working on my third book, A Monetary History of the United States. That should be done sometime next year. But you can get either of those two at your favorite local bookseller. Or, if you like, call us at 800-468-2646.
Very nice. Andy, thank you again for taking time to chat with us. It's always a pleasure to visit.
Thanks for having me.
And again, Andy Gause, we reach out to him as often as we can to kind of get updated on what's going on in the world, and it's been fascinating as we go through this political process, which has been one of the most interesting campaigns of my lifetime. And I don't know, would you agree with that as well, Andy? The political process this time seems to be pretty darn interesting, doesn't it?
Indeed. Well, I'm a student of history, and I would liken this campaign to the Andrew Jackson campaign, the sort of the populist surge. You know, we had globalists then. The idea that our central bank should be privately owned, that was a fact then. In fact, Andrew Jackson ran on this platform, if you vote for me, I will kill this private bank. And he did. And once he did, and we elected him, of course, what happened in that campaign is just like this one. Everyone was against Jackson. The Democrats, the establishment Democrats, his own party, against him. The establishment Republicans against him. You know, the president, all the politicians, all the newspapers, everyone was saying what a horrible choice Jackson was. And they did it so much that they revealed themselves to the people who said, you know what, this guy's speaking for us, and they're speaking for themselves. So that's what I would liken it to. If you want to see the campaign of Jackson replay, then look at this campaign. It's exactly what's happening.
One of the things that I fear is I kind of feel like Donald Trump is stepping right into the shoes of Herbert Hoover. We had, you know, the Great Depression. We had all the stuff that was coming up, and it was kind of blamed on Hoover when it really wasn't Hoover's fault, was it?
No, indeed it wasn't. And many of the policies that Roosevelt eventually put in place were hatched with Herbert Hoover. No, I would put the cause of the Great Depression squarely at the feet of the Federal Reserve. So we gave them the power to create money in 1913. And they were supposed to keep a certain amount of gold and silver coin in their vault sort of to back it up. The first thing they did was issued 3 times as many notes as they had gold and silver to back it up so that they could loan money to the British to prosecute World War I. Now, curiously, when all of that money came back to the United States, it gave us the roaring 20s. And so for a while it felt good. But then, in the infamous words of J.P. Morgan, what happened? Well, someone asked for $1. Someone actually showed up at a Federal Reserve Bank with a paper note and said, give me a silver dollar, give me a gold dollar. And since there were 3 times as many notes as there was gold and silver coin, that ignited a bank run that didn't end until 1933 when Franklin Roosevelt was forced to close the banks and outlaw the private ownership of gold. Then we finally got back to work, but for a period, I would blame it solely on the Federal Reserve, although most economists do blame it on Herbert Hoover.
Yeah, and the sad thing is, I think it's unfairly blamed on Hoover. And, you know, they had the Hoovervilles, and right now I see we've got a president that, you know, won't set a budget. Have we had a budget since he's been in office, since Obama's been in office?
No.
So we've been running with
no
budget whatsoever for 7 years now. And spending is out of control. And at some point, this is going to have to stop. So whoever takes office, they're going to be inheriting a lot of problems that are going to be their fault. They're going to become their problem.
That's right.
And I see if, you know, Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton, whoever it is that takes office, a lot of these things are going to land squarely at their feet, and it's going to be blamed on them whether they actually deserve it or not. And one of those things I look at is the number of foreclosures. Right now there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people living in a home that's been foreclosed where they're not currently making a house payment, and pretty soon that's going to come to an end. They just keep kicking that down the road. You fill out some paperwork and they'll let you stay another month, another month, another month. Well, eventually that ends, and they're going to have to come up with rent or a house payment. Well, where's that money going to come from? They're currently living without rent, without a house payment, and when you have millions of people who now take hundreds or thousands of dollars out of circulation elsewhere to pay rent, the economy is going to be in trouble, and that's going to be the fault of whoever the president is at the time, even though really it's not their fault. It's just that this has been building up for years, and that dam is going to break all at once. And like I said, I have a feeling we're going to see the Herbert Hoover blaming on whoever the next president is. I think it'll be Trump. And like they had Hoovervilles, we're going to have a lot of homeless people because of these foreclosures. And they're going to be, sadly, I'm thinking that they're going to be Trumpvilles, and I don't think that it's his fault, and I don't think that he deserves that.
No, you're right, but it is the alarming lack of productivity that would allow or create these Hoovervilles. And so, Mr. Trump's immediate plan to slash the corporate income tax to less than what it is right now. You can move your company to Ireland and pay 12% tax, or you can leave it in the United States and pay nearly 30% tax. So smart business has moved out of this country. With a single stroke, he could bring back all of these headquarters. And then on the manufacturing side, strict protective tariffs would bring manufacturing jobs back to the United States. And so this increase in productivity would offset the devastating effects of deleveraging the United States. I mean, we've literally lost 5 million manufacturing jobs in the last decade. And unless we do something to bring them back, then there's no money to earn to pay the rent. And this is the real problem. As for those zombie foreclosures, the curious fact is that the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, if you'll look at their balance sheet, when the banks found themselves holding these worthless mortgage-backed securities, that should have been the end of the system. I mean, that should have busted these banks and created the depression that everyone predicted. But for the Federal Reserve creating $1.9 trillion, nearly $2 and buying all of these mortgage-backed securities and then just putting them in the vault. So they're backing nearly $2 trillion that's currently in circulation. And you're right, they're not asking the people to move. They're not asking them to pay rent. They're not even trying to sell these houses, because what do they care? These mortgage-backed securities are stuffed in their vaults, and the money that they use to purchase them is out in circulation. So from their perspective, they'll just leave them in the vault and forget about it. And since Americans apparently don't seem to care what's backing their money, why then a bunch of mortgage-backed securities will back your dollars into the 22nd century.
Andy, thank you again for taking the time to chat with us. Always a pleasure to visit. If folks are interested in the book, what's the phone number once again they can call and get those right directly from you?
Yeah, and in fact, I have 3 audio CDs I'll give to your listeners, too. They are Protecting Your Wealth, The Definition of Money, and the Federal Reserve. 3 half-hour CDs that will explain it all to you. Call 800-468-2646. Mention the John and Heidi Show. We'll send you those 3 CDs for free. And if you want to buy either of my books, they'll be available to you at that time. 800-468-2646.
All right. Andy, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, my friend.
Again, Andy Gause, one of America's foremost experts on the history of U.S. currency. Always fun to chat with him. Thank you so much for listening to PoliticalStorm.com. I'm John Small.